Hi guys, welcome to the Chapter 3 Paperslide show by Aiden and Sean. First off, we have the neuron, which transmits neurological impulses through electrical signals. It starts off in the cell body, which is the life support center that passes those neurological impulses through the axon. The axon messages from the cell body to other neurons, muscles, or glands, and the myelin sheath covers the axon for protection and speeds up the action potential. The action potential is an electrical signal that travels down the axon body, which ends at the terminal branches, which form the junction between the neuron and other cells. The final message is received by the dendrites, which receive the messages at the cell body in a full circle of information with other neurons. So this leads into neurotransmitters, which are the chemical messengers of neurons. They must pass the synaptic gap between neurons to send signals to the next. There are limited neuron receptors, so there does exist a threshold, or the minimum level of stimulation to trigger a neural impulse to release neurotransmitters. When the threshold is reached, reuptake occurs, which is the process by which excess neurotransmitters are reabsorbed by the neuron. It's important to mention that there are agonists, which are molecules that mimic the effects of neurotransmitters. An example would be morphine and how it mimics endorphins, both which obviously reduce pain. And additionally, there are antagonists, which are molecules that block neurotransmitters from binding to the next neuron. And an example would be like certain types of poisons that prevent the body from sending its necessary neurotransmitters to do some sort of function. It's an inhibitor. So this takes us into the nervous system, which is the body's electrochemical communication system, which consists of the central nervous system, which is in the red, made up of the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is in the blue, which is the sensory and motor neurons that connect the central nervous system to the rest of the body. The nervous system also has two aspects called the somatic nervous system, which is part of the peripheral nervous system, and it enables certain voluntary bodily control like contracting muscles. There is also the autonomic nervous system, which is part of the central nervous system and is responsible for automatic and involuntary controls of the body, as is the case for glands, breathing, and having a beating heart. Moreover, the sympathetic nervous system, which is part of the autonomic nervous system, arouses the body, mobilizes its energy in stressful situations. So along with hype is chill, when the parasympathetic nervous system, which is also part of the autonomic nervous system, calms the body and conserves its energy when coming down from the stressful situations. So sympathetic hypes you up, and parasympathetic brings you back down. This leads us to the endocrine system, which is the body's slow chemical communication system that utilizes hormones. The chemical messenger is manufactured by glands and affect other tissues. The primary gland is the pituitary gland at the top, and it's the most influential gland that regulates growth and controls other glands. There are the adrenal glands, which are a pair of glands that sit above the kidneys and secrete adrenaline that arouse the body in times of stress. There are the parathyroid glands, which help with metabolism. And there is the pancreas, which secretes insulin, and that helps regulate blood sugar levels, also known as glucose. And there are the testes, made up of testicles, and they secrete the male sex hormone testosterone. And in females, there are ovaries, which secrete the female sex hormone estrogen. Furthermore, and we do not have a picture for this, sorry about that, but we have scans which help us look at the human body on a scientific level that is not available to the naked eye. For an EEG, or an electroencephalogram, amplifies the reading of brain waves on the surface of the brain. So what would happen is there would be little plugs or little sticky things on this person's head, and as their brain works, the EEG would take the brain waves and it would produce visual lines going up or down, like jagged, kind of look like a lie detector test. Furthermore, we have CT scans, which are computed tomography scans, which are a series of X-ray photos taken at different angles and combined to represent a slice of the body. We have PET scans, which stands for position emission tomography. I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be positive. It's a visual display of brain activity that detects where a radioactive form of glucose goes while the brain performs a certain task. So it tracks a radioisotope, which would enter through the mouth, it would enter through the body, eventually it would circulate back to the brain, and you could see if there were any obstructions or anything of that sort. We have MRIs, which is a technique that uses a magnetic field and radii waves to produce computer-generated images of soft tissue. So if there were tumors in a brain, you would use an MRI to see those tumors inside of the brain tissue. Additionally, there are fMRIs, which are functional MRIs. And what's different about this is that an MRI produces a black and white image, and an fMRI is a technique for revealing the blood flow and brain activity by comparing successive MRI scans to show the function. Next up, we have brain structures. We have the brain stem, which is the oldest and innermost region of the brain, and it contains the pons and medulla. The medulla is at the base of the brain stem and controls bodily functions like heartbeat and breathing. We have the thalamus, which is located on top of the brain stem. It directs messages to the sensory receiving areas of the brain and transmits messages to the cerebellum and medulla. The cerebellum is at the rear of the brain stem, which produces sensory input and coordinates movement and balance. There's the limbic system, which is a neural system below the cerebral hemispheres that include the amygdala, hippocampus, and hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus is the structure below the thalamus, hence hypo, which influences hunger, thirst, and body temperature. It helps govern the endocrine system and is linked to emotion. Additionally, the cerebral cortex is the intricate fabric of interconnected neural cells covering the cerebral hemispheres, the body's ultimate control and information processing center. There are several major lobes in the brain that have specific functions, such as the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, temporal lobes, and occipital lobes, and they all have different functions which help with sensory interpretation in the brain. All right. Continuing on, we have dual processing, which is the principle that information is often simultaneously processed on separate conscious and unconscious tracks. This brings us into the idea of a two-track mind, such as where even though you may be consciously looking at a puzzle, subconsciously your brain is working to see how those pieces fit together. That's kind of the idea of a two-track mind. There's two parts working together to solve a problem. Additionally, there's a left and right portion of the brain. And some of those differences are that in the left brain, it's more verbal, analytic, pays attention to the parts and details, is logical and rational. The right side of the brain is nonverbal, is relational, looks at a bigger picture, and is creative. Additionally, the left and right brain contribute to a high and low road way of thinking. The high road is a conscious way of thinking in non-emergency situations. And the low road is a automatic quick response to danger and fear. This brings us to cognition. There are studies about how the brain works with perception, memory, language, and thinking, but what cognitive neuroscience does is it takes all of these aspects of the brain and it adds in cognition, an active, conscious effort of brain function. This brings us into DNA, which is a complex molecule containing genetic information that makes up chromosomes, and it's composed of genes, which are the small segments of DNA in between the two double helixes, and chromosomes, which are cooled chains of DNA. And DNA is also very important when it comes to heritability, which is the proportion of variation among individuals that we can attribute to certain traits we get from our parents. Which leads us into our final aspect of evolutionary psychology, which is the study of the evolution of behavior in the mind. Very important to mention is natural selection, which is Darwin's principle that among a range of inherited traits, those that lead to increased reproduction and survival will most likely be passed on to succeeding generations. And then with evolution, there's mutation, which is a random error in gene replication that leads to change. Thank you guys for watching. Good luck on the midterm.